throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
Good evening. At 11:39 a.m. Eastern Time, disaster struck America's manned space program. A minute after launch, the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up, killing all 7 crew members, including the schoolteacher Christa McAuliffe. For her family, her students, and millions of Americans watching on television, a moment of joy turned suddenly to horror. The suddenness and violence of the blast meant no escape for the crew, as fragments of the spacecraft plunged into the Atlantic. A stunned and saddened President Reagan canceled his State of the Union message tonight.
All of the news hour tonight will be devoted to the Space Shuttle tragedy. We have a reaction to and discussion of what happened and why, plus videotape reports from the central locations involved, including Concord, New Hampshire, home of schoolteacher Christa McAuliffe.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer News Hour is provided by AT&T. Whether it's telephones, information systems, long-distance services, or computers, AT&T. Funding also is provided by this station and other public television stations, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
7 Americans died aboard Space Shuttle Challenger this morning. The 7 were Francis R. Dick Scobee, the spacecraft commander, Michael J. Smith, the pilot, mission specialist Judith Resnik, Ronald McNair, and Ellison Onizuka, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and Christa McAuliffe, a Concord, New Hampshire schoolteacher, the first participant at NASA's Citizen in Space program. Robin?
This mission, like other recent shuttle launches, had been delayed by weather and mechanical problems, but they only added to the suspense and the unusual attention this flight attracted as the first to carry a private citizen into space. And when the delays ended, everything pointed to a perfect launch. After 5 postponements, the astronauts were well rehearsed in the routine of early morning preparations. They were planning to release a satellite to study Halley's Comet and then retrieve it. Mrs. McAuliffe planned to teach 2 brief lessons for schools on the public broadcasting service. The mission also called for launching a communications satellite. It was to be the first launch from a new pad at Cape Canaveral. At the last moment, another hitch developed this morning. In the bitterly cold weather, icicles formed on the launch pad, and there was concern that they might harm the spacecraft. It took 2 hours to clear them away and get ready for a launch. At first, it looked good.
T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Now controlling.
Roger, roll, Challenger.
Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles. here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. We have no downlink. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
At first, many at the launch site were not fully aware of what had happened. Among those watching were Mrs. McAuliffe's husband, Steve, and their two children, Scott, 9, and Carolyn, 6, members of Scott's third-grade class from Concord, New Hampshire, and her parents, Ed and Grace Corrigan of Framingham, Massachusetts. Here's how the Corrigans and others reacted. Instantly, NASA's often rehearsed rescue procedures went into action. Paramedics parachuted into the Atlantic. But because flaming debris continued to fall from the sky, it was 45 minutes before Coast Guard ships and rescue helicopters could move in to search the impact area closely. There was almost no hope that the crew could have survived such a cataclysmic explosion. But it was not until 4:30 p.m. that NASA announced officially there was no evidence of survivors. It was 19 years ago yesterday that the only other fatalities in the U.S. space program happened. 3 Apollo astronauts died in an explosion on the launch pad.
The 1,200 students at Concord, New Hampshire High School were assembled together to watch this morning's launch. They had a special interest, a 37-year-old English teacher named Christa McAuliffe. We have a report from Concord by Mary Ann Kane.
There was an air of jubilation, of party hats and party horns at Concord High School this morning as hundreds of Christa McAuliffe's colleagues, friends, and students gathered around television monitors in the school auditorium to watch the 11:39 blast-off. It was going to be a great party, a great send-off. History was being made. They even joined in cheering the countdown.
4, 3, 2, 1.
They were so happy, so proud and excited for the 37-year-old social studies teacher. In a sense, she carried with her many of their own hopes for adventure, for challenge, for self-realization. But all of that suddenly and tragically shattered when the shuttle Challenger exploded within moments of takeoff. They witnessed it on the monitors. Suddenly, there was silence. Only the low tones of the television monitors witnessed to the tragic event. The students sat in stunned disbelief, some simply staring, others trying to comfort each other. Then they left, and the press was ushered out.
Today's tragedy caused the cancellation of tonight's State of the Union address. President Reagan and congressional leaders agreed to postpone it a week until next Tuesday night. President Reagan was in the Oval Office preparing to brief a group of television anchors and correspondents on the State of the Union when he was informed of the tragedy. He did eventually join the group in the Roosevelt Room at the White House. He spoke then of the horror he felt when he viewed a television replay of the explosion and of his deep sympathy and grief for the families of the 7 victims. He said his mind was fixed on remembering his meeting Christa McAuliffe, her husband and 2 children, right in that same White House room several weeks ago. He dispatched Vice President Bush to Cape Canaveral to express his concern to the families, and later in the afternoon, from the Oval Office, President Reagan spoke briefly about the tragedy on national television.
We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobee, Judith Resnik, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Christa McAuliffe. We mourn their loss as a nation together. To the families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers.
On Capitol Hill, the stunned House of Representatives observed a minute of silence. The chaplain of the Senate said, "Our hearts are smitten and we are reduced to silence." Both houses recessed in respect until tomorrow. 3 members of Congress reacted with particularly personal knowledge. Senator Jake Garn and Congressman Bill Nelson had just flown on shuttle missions, and Senator John Glenn, the first American astronaut to orbit the Earth.
You say this is a day we've managed to avoid for a quarter of a century. You say we've talked about before and speculated on, and it finally has arrived. We hope we could push this day back forever. But the people that were on the flight today carried our hopes and dreams along with them, and they'll live forever in our memories. And I guess that's the best tribute we can give to them. I think everyone that's ever had any connection with the program has felt that someday there would be a loss in flight. We're dealing with tremendous powers and speeds. You're traveling in orbit at 5 miles a second and trying to get back into the atmosphere from that kind of speed. And so, are we going to be perfect forever? I guess the answer was proven this morning, that the answer to that is no. But that doesn't mean that man doesn't keep trying in these areas and that we're not just as dedicated to seeing that this kind of research goes on.
I don't know of any time that I have been more shocked or more moved than when my first wife was killed in an automobile accident. And so it's been very, very difficult for me this morning.
What does this do to the space program here and its support on the Hill, Senator?
Well, I have great confidence in the space program. I think it's a remarkable system, and I think we should push ahead after we have determined the cause. Obviously, we should not fly until we have determined the cause of this particular failure, but I think we need to look at all of the successes, the remarkable safety record that the space program has had, the benefits that come from it, and the crew members that I knew so well. I would expect that they would want us to go ahead with the space program after we have gone through the proper investigations and analysis and know what happened.
This system is not without risk, and everyone who climbs on one of those loaded spaceships understands that risk. The people who design the system understand that risk, and as a result, it's unfortunate that this great tragedy has occurred, but that is not going to stop the space program, nor should it, nor would the 7 crew members who perished today would ever have wanted that to be contemplated.